Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is, what is it? Oh, well, it's actually June 18th, Friday, June 18th, 2021. But it is also, I guess, this is it. I mean, we did it. We did it. I stood by and watched it happen. It is the first federal Juneteenth celebration. Juneteenth, of course, has been a holiday, as it turns out. For those of you who don't know, I think I knew this was the case, but it never really registered with me until we were debating this once again in the federal legislature, that it has been a holiday in Texas for quite some time, and of course celebrated as a holiday, well, since it started in I guess the holiday was celebrated for the first time. I keep reading 1867. I am sure that by 1866 they were pretty pleased with things as well. But this is it in terms of the beginning of the Juneteenth celebration on the federal level. And it's really kind of exciting to me, just in terms of the speed with which it went from, hey, this might happen, to it happened, which all by itself is reason for excitement. But don't take my word for it, because what do I know about things? Darwin Darko has sent me a segment which will help illustrate the excitement. First of all, because he's just genuinely excited about it happening, and he, like me, can't believe that it happened at all, and it happened so quickly. But it did happen and turned around so quickly that the segment which he sent to me probably, Wednesday? Perhaps a little earlier, maybe Tuesday. I don't know. When did he get excited about that? I'll look at my email. But earlier in the week, and the Senate had just passed it in that chamber, but the House had not yet passed the thing, although it was, as he notes in his piece, the Senate was the hard part here, because, everyone's nuclear and everyone can blow everything up. It's just, in the middle of his segment, he's saying, well, I assume it's going to pass the House, but are they going to pass it and enact it? And is it going to be next year we'll do Juneteenth? I mean, technically there's time, and it's just sort of interesting all by itself. Like I say, the most amazing part of it to me is the speed with which they turned it around. They could easily have said, well, it falls on a Saturday, Juneteenth this year. So, we get a 1-year reprieve and everybody gets 1 year to prepare for the idea of celebrating this new holiday, which really, looking back from today, which will be the celebrated day of Juneteenth, because as a federal holiday, though it falls on a Saturday, we will celebrate it with a day off for a lot of federal workers, maybe a lot of people who follow the federal schedule as well, today. And as it happens, great, that's awesome. Friday, day off, long weekend, it's really nice. And I don't know, that would probably raise the profile of the new holiday more than anything else, is just to surprise everybody with a day off. But looking back on it from the day of, thinking about it, I'm just thinking about the idea that probably had been put forward by people who are, squeamish somehow about having the holiday. And there are such people, and that's, I guess, what amazes me. Well, we need a year to prepare for it. Why? What do you need a year to prepare for? You go home, take a day off. Well, all sorts of, and I'm sure there's lots of logistics, and I'm sure that there are a lot of places that say, well, we'll be recognizing the federal holiday and celebrating it by taking the Friday or prior, or I don't know what the protocol is for deciding whether the Friday prior or the Monday after is the one that gets the day off. But anyway, I guess we'll figure that out when it comes to it. But, there probably were people who just said, well, we just need some time. And no, you don't. Because even if you don't take the day off, look, you just recognize the date and say, great, fantastic. Republicans who actually did oppose this for whatever reason, well, for one thing, they didn't show up in the legislature and vote against it. And that, I think, has some people puzzled too. Why not? They'll oppose anything. They'll take any opportunity to kick black and brown and people and minorities of any sort, any chance they get. Why not this time? I think it might have had something to do with the fact that it is already a holiday in Texas, and the Texan Republican senators can't, find a way to position themselves to be pro-Texas, but against federalizing this holiday. It's awfully difficult to do. It's not impossible, and logic never applies to those guys. So I really did hold my breath a little bit and wonder whether or not they would do it. But once John Cornyn jumped out of the way and cleared the path, it was unanimous consent in the Senate. And even though Ron Johnson attempted for a little while to block the thing under his argument, of course, made no sense whatsoever. Well, it's such a bad idea because we're telling taxpayers they have to pay for another day off for federal workers. Well, they pay for days off for federal workers all the time. Well, one more isn't going to do too much. And two, by the way, take a look at the federal workforce. Just a quick peek around in most areas will show you that there's a pretty significant representation among the federal workforce of African Americans, and then take a look at who their friends and coworkers are who will be willing to say, well, no, they don't deserve a day off. That would be horrific because reasons. Not too many of them going to speak up on that. Anyway, what I really ought to do is this is a little early to do this, but I have Darwin's segment here, and it runs a little long. It's not terrible, and in terms of what I mean is don't worry about it. And I had the opportunity, and he gives me the opportunity right away to edit the thing down. But there was something I think about the built-in delays and during which he's pondering his words and just trying to figure out how to feel about the whole thing, how to express himself, that it was really natural and belonged there. So I'm giving over that time, and it's a little early, like I said, to roll somebody else's segment. I usually wait a little while, but I think maybe you'll find his excitement about this as infectious as I did. And plus, the tea is still hot. So thanks, Darwin. Hold on a second, everybody. Let me roll this. You got to hear this.
Okay, so I'm going to start this off with an apology. I'm sorry, David. You're going to have to probably do some editing here because I'm excited and I cannot control my levels. So I'll just jump right into it and say I never thought that I would ever be shouting out Senator John Cornyn. Hi, everybody. This is Darwin _Darko. And why am I excited about something John Cornyn did? I'm reading here straight from Twitter, just read from his feed. Happy that my bill to recognize Juneteenth as a national holiday just passed the Senate. It has been a state holiday in Texas for more than 40 years. Now, more than ever, we need to learn from our history and continue to form a more perfect union. Yeah, you heard that right. Juneteenth, which is coming up pretty soon. This is wild to me. This is amazing. I love this. So for those of you who don't know, Juneteenth is short for June 19th. It marks the day that federal troops arrived in Galveston, Texas. You might remember Galveston was, ravaged by, I think, a hurricane a few years back. So they arrived in Texas back in 1865 to take control of the state and ensure that all enslaved people are to be free. The troops came there 2.5 years after the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation. So just keep that pin in your head for future reference that when people talk about Juneteenth, it's not necessarily the celebration of the end of slavery, but the celebration of the announcement for the last people that was still enslaved when they were free. Because until we are all free, none of us are truly free. Right? So that's amazing that we have this now as it passed the Senate and it passed the Senate, and the Senate is the hard part. The Senate is the hard part. And they did it. Juneteenth again honors this end of slavery in the United States and is considered the longest running African American holiday. So obviously today I'm coming to you as the senior black correspondent wearing that hat today. The Hill already wrote something up on this, and I'll just jump right in. The Senate on Tuesday unanimously passed legislation to make Juneteenth, which celebrates the emancipation of former enslaved African Americans, a federal holiday. The bill, whose passage comes just days ahead of Juneteenth celebrated on June 19th, still needs to pass the House. Again, like I said, the Senate is the hard part, and it passed unanimously. I'll keep reading. but it's a major step forward after a similar resolution has been blocked in recent years by Republican senators. Cornyn wrote, happy that my bill to recognize Juneteenth as a national holiday. This is just recording the tweet there. I'll move on. Senator Ed Markey of Massachusetts, Democrat, who sponsored the bill, was presiding over the chamber when Majority Leader Chuck Schumer successfully got it passed. While Juneteenth commemorates the abolishment of slavery, the date isn't a reference to the end of slavery in the United States, but to the time when enslaved people in Texas learned of their freedom. Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin, who was viewed as the key holdout, announced earlier Tuesday that he had dropped his objection to passing the bill, clearing its path in the Senate. He wrote, while it still seems strange that having taxpayers provide federal employees paid time off is now required to celebrate the end of slavery, it is clear that there is no appetite in Congress to further discuss the matter. Therefore, I do not intend to object. Yeah, okay, federal employees get paid for all kinds of other holidays, and it trickles to other industries, private industry as well. It can cause competition between companies because they provide even more holidays than some other companies in the private sector. So what's your beef, man? Get out of here. So Johnson had previously objected to the resolution last year, arguing that it gave federal workers another paid day off. Johnson had floated swapping Juneteenth with Columbus Day on the federal government's list of holidays. Now, hey, maybe you were onto something there. If we would have gotten rid of Columbus Day and swapped it with Juneteenth in one fell swoop, that would have been major. There's been efforts of late, trying to rebrand Columbus Day, Indigenous People Day, and just different ways to try to get rid of the whole stigma of what it meant or what it means to celebrate what Columbus supposedly did. That would have been great. To swap it out with Juneteenth, that would have been powerful. But alas, I'll take this. The fact that it passed unanimously in the Senate blows my mind in and of itself. So a poll released by Gallup found that more Americans were in favor of making Juneteenth a national holiday than not. According to the poll, nearly 35% of Americans believe that Juneteenth should become a federal holiday, while only about 25% were against it. 40% of Americans are undecided on the matter. There's always that 40%. 40% of Americans undecided. I would say that these 40% probably never even heard of Juneteenth. I'm not talking about knowing what it means or even when it's celebrated. I bet they never even heard of Juneteenth, though that 40%. So, okay, I'll take the 35% and just walk away with that. A little brief reading here from an NPR article. They talk about how it unanimously passed the Senate there. I'll start off a little bit towards the end here. So the holiday celebrated on June 19th, and it began in 1865 when enslaved people in Texas learned that they had been freed under the Emancipation Proclamation. It's probably the fourth, fifth time I said that in this recording, and I never get tired of saying it. The then President Abraham Lincoln had signed a proclamation outlawing slavery years early, but it was not until 1865 that those in bondage in Texas were freed. The measure is expected to be approved by the Democrat-led House as well, of course, but the timing is unclear. I don't know if it's going to be for next year. It would be so dope if they got this enacted for this year. Okay, so it'd be great if they got it enacted for this year's Juneteenth. Juneteenth this year, however, is on a Saturday. So it kind of gives them a little wiggle room. I guess they don't have to have it take effect immediately. But like a lot of federal holidays, if it falls on a Saturday or Sunday, you get the weekday. That Friday or the Monday is when it will be observed. So I don't know how soon something like this can go into effect, but that would be dope. So making Juneteenth a federal holiday is a major step forward to recognizing the wrongs of the past, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer said in a statement. But we must continue to work to ensure equal justice and fulfill the promise of the Emancipation Proclamation and our Constitution. The recognition of Juneteenth as a legal holiday comes amid a broader national reckoning on race and racism that helped shape America, aka critical race theory. For something like this to pass right now, unanimously in the Senate, while people aren't even typing critical race theory anymore on Twitter. People are typing CRT because of the timelines that would get wind of it and then come jump in and just burn your whole Twitter feed down. And this just passed unanimously. Academic calls to more critically examine the lens through which race has modeled public life, including in economics and the justice system, have promoted backlash by some Republican lawmakers who say that viewpoint unfairly villainizes white people and overstates the extent to which racism is foundational to American society. Republican legislation to limit teaching a historically accurate picture of U.S. history in public institutions has advanced in some half a dozen states. Teachers have warned that these efforts limit their ability to engage critically with their students at a time when much of the national conversation revolves around issues stemming from race. This was great. This is dope. First step. I know it's going to pass the House. It would be great if Biden is back in town to sign that. It may be a little performative. I get it. Perhaps even something that would have even better effect is passing H.R. 1, right? Or at very least make a November 4th or make Election Day a national holiday that falls on a damn Tuesday every damn time for some reason. So I get it, but I'm still excited about it. It's something. And it's something that I always say about being black in America. It was quoted early in the previous article that the country, as much as I wake up sometimes and am disgusted by what I see, this country and the people that are activists and the people that fight for things like this happen is inching closer and closer to becoming a more perfect union. And I can appreciate that progress. Thanks for listening. This is Darwin_Darko. Take it away, David.
Okay, I guess I will. I don't know how to follow that exactly. I feel like just playing it over and over again for the whole entirety of the show, quite honestly. But thanks very much, Darwin, for chiming in on that one. And by the way, in case you didn't know why there was an underscore in there, that's how you can follow him on Twitter. That's how you'll find him on Twitter, Darwin_Darko. And it's become like his nickname, Darwin, quote unquote, underscore. All right. Well, anyway, hey, dope it is, I guess, in my whitest possible voice. Yeah, that was pretty exciting. I think I love the excitement of thinking about the possibility that it might just be enacted for this year. And now we're sitting here on the day and it actually has happened. And that's just got to be even more exciting. But yeah, they squeaked that one in there. By the way, I didn't get to read Bill's morning tweet, but it is on point. And I guess really on point in terms of figuring out how to implement the holiday on such short notice. I don't know I don't know what they're really doing here and how they're dealing with the federal workforce on this or not. But Bill was tweeting, of course, that the Kagro in the Morning radio show was live now. Of course, so far it's been mostly the Darwin show, and just fine with that. But retaking the controls here, the Kagro in the Morning radio show is live now. Now here, he says, Kagro X me, David Waldman, says, and I'm only saying it because Bill wrote it, and now I have to say it, says there will be mail delivery today, despite the Juneteenth holiday. I guess that's actually true, just in terms of maybe they weren't able to schedule people to be off. I mean, again, you can just say, don't come to work, and most people will comply with that order, but I don't know. The logistics maybe demanded that things go forward. But it is said that there will be mail delivery today despite the Juneteenth holiday, to which Louis DeJoy will respond, not if I can help it. So in the end, we may have Louis DeJoy to thank for getting past the logistical difficulties and making sure that everything felt all the way through, top to bottom, like a federal holiday. I also note, by the way, that he really was on to something there when Darwin was noting, was Ron Johnson the one proposing that, I guess it would make sense given his position on establishing the holiday that it was, it's not that I hate black people, you see, it's that, we give federal workers too many paid days off. Maybe we should swap one out. We'll eliminate one. What's it? Dear Mr. President. There was a Simpsons episode where Grandpa Simpson writes a letter. Was it to the president or something? There are too many. What was it? Too many states nowadays. Please eliminate 3. You remember that one? I am not. P.S. I am not a crackpot. Well, there are too many federal holidays these days. Please, if you're going to add one, eliminate one. That's we're balancing the budget. in terms of numbers of federal holidays. But the proposition there for a moment, a brief moment, was maybe eliminate Columbus Day. And I'm with Darwin on that one. Hey, not only did you stumble onto the right position and allow the enshrinement of Juneteenth as a federal holiday to go forward, but you might have accidentally come up with a great idea of eliminating Columbus Day as well. So, but they haven't taken that step. But that's out there. And I think most people who have thought about this bill, this enactment, as a springboard on federal holidays, their minds go instead to what was also on Darwin's mind, the idea of establishing Election Day as a federal holiday. So maybe that's the follow-up to it. And okay, well, anyway, I just thought that was all kind of interesting and exciting. And let's see, Greg Dworkin, who's not joining us this morning, or at least not regularly scheduled, but today he's got the day off. Now he can, well, he always has the day off on Fridays anyway, but now he's got a federal excuse for it. But he was doing some reading this morning via Twitter and sharing this Juneteenth thread from, I guess, a historian, I should say, of the 19th century. That is to say, that's what he studies. He's not a historian from the 19th century or time travel or anything of the sort, but as Greg was advertising, a subject matter expert writing on the Juneteenth holiday and its establishment, and I'll share that with you just because now I'm in the mood. We've got that. Why Juneteenth? He begins by asking. It was the date in 1865 that U.S. troops under command of General Gordon Granger arrived at Galveston, Texas. He issued General Order 3. The people of Texas are informed that in accordance with a proclamation from the Executive of the United States, all slaves are free. How about that executive order power? The whole story, of course, of Juneteenth is kind of interesting and amazing all by itself. Although I don't know why we would have expected people who, believed in chattel slavery to have accepted an executive order from their hated enemy and the president of what they considered at that point to be a different country, Abraham Lincoln, why they would have put that into force. It shouldn't be surprising that it took so long to enforce the Emancipation Proclamation, but it still is because, of course, it involves human bondage, and that's amazing, period. So anyway, I guess you could well imagine, if you try to put yourself in the time frame and in the mindset of the people there, that, yeah, until federal troops show up to enforce it and say, well, we'll kill you if you don't do this, they were probably going to ignore the order. Anyway, Aaron goes on to say, note that that emancipation itself did not occur in one singular moment. We love to try to sum things up that way by hanging it all on the document and the date, I guess, but that's never really the case. I mean, even the passage of the Juneteenth legislation the other day, we're still standing around saying, well, are we going to have the holiday? Or are we not going to have the holiday? It's only in a couple of days. The wheels turn slowly. Imagine the actual emancipation, let alone, the celebration of the day. Oh, that reminds me. I need to reset all the numbers on the soundboard there. I was boosting the sound a little bit. For all the trouble that Darwin thought he was going to have in keeping his levels under control, it was pretty subdued in terms of the volume there. There were places I had to turn that up. I can't believe it. So he's working hard for us. Anyway, so Aaron Astor, again, continuing his thread, note that emancipation did not occur in one singular moment. It required a combination of presidential order, that being, of course, the Emancipation Proclamation itself. It also required congressional acts and enslaved people themselves bravely pressing for freedom, especially among the Union lines within the war, the Union military movement, and constitutional amendment in the end after the war was finished, right? As this map visualization shows, and there is one down here, and I'm not used to seeing map visualizations in 19th century historical investigations, but here it is. Well, as the map visualization, it's a tough word for the morning, shows, most of the enslaved people in the South were actually not freed until the very end, which again makes a certain amount of sense, given that basically the Southern slaveholders had said, you're going to have to enforce this at the point of a sword. You're going to have to come down here and force me to do it. And the Union said, okay, here we come. Maybe the last time that we took this stuff seriously. So most enslaved people not freed until the very end, though in some parts of the South, enslaved men, women, and children attained their freedom quite early in the war. I imagine that's to do with which territories were initially occupied by federal troops and which were not. Ironies abound with the timing. He continues here. Some of the earliest liberation occurred in the secessionist hotbed of South Carolina's Low Country and Sea Islands in 1862. But emancipation did not arrive in Unionist Delaware and Unionist Kentucky, we remind you, by the way, until ratification of the 13th Amendment in December of 1865. So, very definitely a spotty history in terms of implementing emancipation. And I guess when you think back to it, it should be less than surprising. But again, the surprising bit here about Unionist Delaware. But Delaware, southern Delaware is a different place from, say, like the Newark or Newark and Wilmington areas, for sure. And it had a lot more in common with the South and was more connected to the South, and you can see how that might be. Hi everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We're taking things easy because it's a day off, I guess, sort of. There's no days off, of course, here on the radio. And these federal holidays, we need to keep you company for celebrating them. And occasionally we take one or two off, and maybe next year. See, I'm slower than the federal government in implementing the new federal holiday. I made no plans. It was just me. I could have just said, that's it, I'm taking the day off. But then I wouldn't have had a chance to play Darwin's segment. I'm here solely for Darwin's segment. And I think that's probably a pretty good, honest assessment of it. I really did feel an obligation to play that in a good way. You should never feel bad about that. But, yeah, I mean, I really think I came in mostly to play that. And now, playing off of that, we'll spend the bulk of the day probably reading all the ancillary articles that go along with it. We left off, I think I made it like 2 tweets into this tweet thread from Aaron Astor, history professor, but the one who was giving us the visual representation, the map showing when enslaved peoples were actually freed from bondage, despite the date on the Emancipation Proclamation. And that's kind of interesting, too. Especially, as he said, some of the earliest emancipation going on in South Carolina, where you would have thought they would have put up the biggest fight, and some of the slowest reaction coming in Union territory, Delaware and Kentucky in particular. Oh, that's interesting. So Scott says we never went into commercial in all that time, too, which is good because it's a good thing that I muted the microphone, because for Juneteenth, what I thought I would do is sit around making that underarm, pump the arm fart noise over and over again. And I thought makes compelling radio, but really, honestly, the music probably would have been better for this. And thankfully, I did remember to mute the microphone after a couple of ahs before we cut out. Anyway, that only means that you didn't get the chance possibly to hear Darwin also narrate the commercial break as well. So he's among the many who are joining in my call for helping out with the announcement duties during the breaks. Anyway, where were we in all this? I'm now confused by all the messaging and the fact that we missed out on our usual commercial break. Maybe for the holiday. Maybe that's what it's all about. See, I didn't get word directly to Justice how we would be handling the holiday. So where were we? Yes, South Carolina freed their slaves a lot quicker than Delaware, which is amazing. But Delaware, down south, it's farmland. It was a pretty southern state. Interstate 95 wasn't around yet, and so it wasn't most people's impression of Delaware. And coastal travel, though it was probably, pretty much along the same route. There was a lot more ferry activity there. The southern Delaware played a bigger part, I think, in Delaware politics at the time. And the geography of southern Delaware is just, it's agricultural, it's rural. You could see how that would happen. And of course, on the map, if you look closely at it, the southern Delaware dips down into the south, dips down below the Mason-Dixon line, for one thing, and is all part of that one weird sort of barrier island / peninsula formation there on the East Coast, the Delmarva Peninsula, Delaware, Maryland, and Virginia, each claiming a piece of that barrier thing. It's not quite an island, not quite a peninsula. I don't know how to describe it, but take a look at the map. You'll see what I'm talking about. Of the famous Emancipation Proclamation of January 1st, 1863, ? We are asked by Aaron Astor, whose thread this is. This map shows the contingencies of troop movement and early politics of Reconstruction at the moment Lincoln issued the proclamation. Union-controlled areas exempted, but only if a pro-union civil government existed. And that's not always the case in some of these places. And here, it's a visual thing, it's a map, but give you an idea of what it's representing for us here. I'm not certain why this is. Okay. Status of areas on January 1st, 1863. Well, for one thing, it's a color-coded map, and one color, yellow here, encompasses the entirety of the state of Tennessee. So I looked down at the color coding legend here on the map, and it just tells me that yellow is Tennessee. So I'm not certain what that's supposed to be worth. I know it's Tennessee. It says so. But that, I guess, to historians is much more meaningful than it is to me. Let's see. The red shaded areas are seceded areas occupied by Union troops, but not exempted. Slaves in these areas were immediately freed. That would be Northern Virginia and the east coast of Virginia, all the way down almost to the Hampton Roads area, which is colored blue, which marks seceded areas occupied by Union troops but exempt from the terms of the proclamation. And that includes the southern, i.e. Virginia, part of that Delmarva Peninsula, all of what later became, or at that point became, West Virginia, and the Hampton Roads area of Virginia, occupied but not emancipated, exempt from this. Charleston, South Carolina, also occupied and immediately emancipated, and I guess that has to do with projection of Union naval power, and I suppose probably a little bit of residual anger over Fort Sumter's assault, and so the retaking of that area and quick occupation of South Carolina's chief port, which basically cut off all of their economic power. Similarly, in the area around Jacksonville, Florida. Same situation. Baton Rouge, Louisiana, even though New Orleans and the surrounding environs were occupied but marked blue here, where the Emancipation Proclamation didn't immediately take effect. And also in the red area of immediate occupation and immediate emancipation, northern Arkansas and the extreme north of Mississippi and Alabama, around the areas of Corinth, Mississippi, and Huntsville, Alabama, south of the border from Tennessee. Tennessee remains sort of unexplained here. I don't know offhand what the status of Tennessee was, but if you're a historian, you probably do. Anyway, it's probably pointless for me to try to describe it to you, but it is interesting that there are these weird pockets of emancipation, immediate emancipation, and then not so immediate emancipation. The occupation of these areas, I think, like I said, probably mostly due to projection of Union naval power and their ability to cut off major port areas. And then, I don't know what was going on in northern Arkansas, except that it was probably relatively lightly defended, and the ability to raise anti-slavery troops from Missouri, just above Arkansas, and just to push down, given the role of Missouri in the famous compromise, you probably had a lot of those free soiler types hanging out still in Missouri and anxious and excited at the idea of occupying northern Arkansas. Maybe that's it. All right, I'll continue on and leave the real history to Aaron Astor. The red areas, he says, generally experienced emancipation first, though the first real emancipation event at Fortress Monroe is in one of the blue sections. Slaves retermed Contraband of War by General Benjamin Butler in May of 1861, codified by two confiscation acts in August of 1861 and July of 1862. You should probably spend some time on Wikipedia looking those up. But not the most graceful way of treating the idea of emancipation, but without the proclamation, this is pre-Emancipation Proclamation, the Union generals doing the best that they can legally to come up with some excuse for setting free the slaves in areas that the Union Army was occupying. Well, since they're considered chattel here in the South, we'll simply confiscate that chattel as contraband of war and do what we will with it, dispose of this property as we see fit, and for now that'll be emancipation. So, some great indignity in all of it, but I guess the outcome is, what the Union abolitionists were looking for anyway, even if it didn't necessarily win a lot of points with the actual people involved. Maybe it did. At that point, they say, I don't care what you call it, just set me free. There's a little bit more here from Aaron. He continues on. Oh, actually, quite a bit more, but the thread becomes disconnected. The Corinth, Mississippi contraband camp. How about that? I'm not aware of the history there, but I mentioned to you that on the map that Corinth, Mississippi was one of the occupied areas in the extreme north of Mississippi. And there, apparently in emancipating the area's slaves, resettling them involved settling them into a contraband camp, which probably wasn't the most pleasant place in the world, but they were probably better served that way than, just saying, well, I don't know what to do with you. You're free, but, stick around where you currently live. That wasn't going to work. The contraband camp, and it's a historical site now, and so he's pointing out there's some nice plaques and statuary illustrating the fact that it's a historical site. Now, the Corinth contraband camp interprets the lives of enslaved people as they reached Union lines and built lives in freedom. Corinth is one of the red areas on the map. But political and military events shaped the general timing of emancipation. The preliminary Emancipation Proclamation was issued on September 22nd, 1862, to entice rebellious states to return to the Union. They would be exempted from the full proclamation on January 1st if they re-entered the Union. Tennessee, there we go, was granted a temporary blue status because Governor Andrew Johnson thought that he could form a unionist civilian government if only Lincoln agreed to hold off on emancipation for a little bit. Well, that failed, and on August 8th, Johnson encouraged black military enlistment and freedom. For this reason, African Americans in Tennessee and Kentucky and much of the Upper South have long recognized August 8th as their Juneteenth. How about that? And here's a historical marker that notes it, or at least a picture of the historical marker. And is there any tension that needs to be settled there or not? Is everybody going to agree on Juneteenth is a pretty good time to celebrate this? The vicissitudes of war, Aaron continues, brought emancipation to some states, Mississippi, for instance, before others, as in Alabama. Note that the last Confederate general to surrender, Stand Watie, W-A-T-I-E, I'm not familiar. But he, being the last to surrender, did not do so until June 23rd, 1865. E. Kirby Smith signed surrender of the Confederate States of America, Trans-Mississippi in Galveston, okay, on June 2nd. So, Juneteenth wasn't slaves first hearing about their emancipation after the war. It was when the Emancipation Proclamation could finally take effect in Texas. Confederates surrendered in Texas just 17 days earlier. As elsewhere, emancipation arrived in Texas with the Union Army, i.e. the point of the sword, or bayonet, as they might have it then. So it wasn't like slaves were kept in the dark, they were just kept. They knew that they had been proclaimed free, but all the guns around them at the time said they were still slaves. It wasn't until a new bunch of guns arrived that said you're not, that they weren't. But, that's another unfortunate parallel. We frequently talk about rights enforced at the point of a gun, which, generally speaking, do not have points. But you can point them at people, but you get the idea. But rights enforced at the point of a sword or at the wrong end of a gun, we don't really think of as rights, per se. It's more akin to plunder. And so, I guess, in that sense, no surprise that freedom wasn't really forthcoming for black Americans despite the emancipation for some time. It wasn't unless there were people around willing to let local oligarchs, essentially, know that they would be killed for trying to continue the practice of holding people as slaves, that they were actually freed. But it's important to note, as he continues here, that African American Union soldiers arrived in Texas in larger numbers from June 1865 through 1866, often replacing white Union soldiers sent back home. And as elsewhere, the course and timing of emancipation shaped the process of Reconstruction to come. At the same time, it's important to remember how unthinkable general emancipation was to most Americans, black and white, in 1860. What happened in the next few years was revolutionary, incomplete in many ways, but still one of the most profound moments of liberation in history. Illustrated by yet another historical map, too small for me to actually interpret on the air here, but I'm sure of some great interest. And so when our summary is published later on, you will have a full link to Aaron's tweet thread here. And as I was reading this and looking over it during the break, another item relevant to Juneteenth shared via Twitter, a link to Time Magazine's piece from just a few days, or updated a few days ago, but published at this time last year. So now updated with the new development that the bill has actually passed. But last year, an article entitled "Activists Are Pushing to Make Juneteenth a National Holiday. Here's the History Behind Their Fight," from Olivia Waxman, again, last year in Time magazine. The Democrat-led U.S. Senate passed a bill Tuesday, this is the update, that would make June 19th a federal holiday, and it now goes to the Democrat-led House of Representatives for approval. It worked. It was fine. From that point on, as Darwin said, the Senate was the hard part. Already celebrated each year as Juneteenth, the date marks the day in 1865 when enslaved men and women in Texas found out they were free. But Aaron, of course, just corrected us on that. They knew they were quote-unquote free, but that was the day which, I guess, the critical balance of troops. Enough Union troops had arrived in Texas that the Texans were willing to concede that their slaves had indeed been emancipated. In June 2020, then President Donald Trump, can you believe that guy was president, raised awareness of the holiday accidentally. I mean, they really should be noting here. He raised awareness of the holiday with plans to hold a campaign rally in, of all places, you remember this now? Tulsa, which also had its profile raised with that stupid move. But a campaign rally in Tulsa on June 19th, near the site of the 1921 race massacre. Also, again, getting a boosted profile. And then, of course, there was the fact that he killed Herman Cain there. So, you know, that probably didn't help with things. But the decision sparked backlash, and the rally was pushed back a day. The Senate's move comes a year after a global conversation about race has continued amid the protests that have followed the deaths of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, and Breonna Taylor. Several prominent companies, such as Twitter, Target, Nike, and the National Football League, declared Juneteenth a company holiday. Time magazine, by the way, also observes Juneteenth as a company holiday. It is noted here. The road to such a holiday becoming a reality has been long. Texas Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, who has introduced a resolution to recognize the historical significance of Juneteenth, told Time in June of 2020 that while it took nearly 20 years for Martin Luther King Jr. Day to become a national holiday, she is optimistic that the time is right for increasing awareness about slavery and how its legacy is carried over into modern racism. Yes, good idea. There needs to be a reckoning, an effort to unify. And she's right, and Republicans who complained that Juneteenth would somehow destroy our unity, that's actually the complaint of a lot of Republican activists these days, are completely off their rocker, but they're Republicans. So you start from that premise and anything goes. So, as Sheila Jackson Lee was saying, there needs to be a reckoning and an effort to unify. One thing about national holidays, they help educate people about what the story is. Juneteenth legislation is a call for freedom, but it also reinforces the history of African Americans. We've fought for this country. We've made great strides, but we're still the victims of sharp disparities. Our neighborhoods reflect that. We've been denied the same opportunities for housing, access to health care, and in 2020, during COVID-19, all of the glaring disparities are shown. Because of that, I think this is a time that we may find people who are desirous to understand the history, and not necessarily only of African Americans, but of the history of America. So, on to the origins of Juneteenth. Some details about the origins of Juneteenth are lost to history, and many of those details that do survive only became more widely known later on. June 19th, 1865, 2.5 years after Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation, 2 months after Confederate General Robert E. Lee surrendered at Appomattox, the Union Army's Major General Gordon Granger reached Galveston, Texas. There he read aloud General Order Number 3. The people of Texas are informed that in accordance with the proclamation of the Executive of the United States, all slaves are free. Why it took 2.5 years for the news of emancipation to reach Galveston is not clear. No, it's pretty clear. The arms that forced the issue didn't reach Galveston for 2.5 years. It's far away in terms of occupying all the land in between what we'll call here and there. But a combination of factors are thought to have been at play. The article continues. According to Rashida Harrison, assistant professor of social relations and policy at James Madison College in Michigan, at Michigan State University, the most popular theories, we really have to theorize about this, involve the idea that, quote, there weren't enough Union generals who could get over there. White slave owners wanted to maintain hold on enslaved people by not alerting them, and slaveholders wanted to get one more crop out of enslaved folks. Those are all pretty much the same theory, and pretty valid. Some stories about why it took so long for news to hit are the stuff of legend, such as one that says Lincoln sent a soldier on a mule to ride to Texas, spreading the news along the way. That probably wasn't it. In fact, however, the scene in Galveston was one repeated frequently throughout the South. Juneteenth is the best remembered date, but it's by far not the only date. As the Union Army continues to win battles and occupy territory, versions of General Order 3 are read throughout the South, says Greg Carr, chair of the Department of Afro-American Studies at Howard University. African Americans in Mississippi and Alabama have celebrated emancipation in May, for example, and William H. Wiggins Jr.'s 1987 book, Oh Freedom, Afro-American Emancipation Celebrations, details some of these stories. And I guess that would probably be the definitive source for the different dates. It's linked in here, too. You can have a look. Might be something fun to spend the weekend with. After General Order 3 was handed down, many formerly enslaved African Americans left the Galveston area, good idea, to find family members who had been sold away from the region. As they moved north or west, they brought Juneteenth with them. In years to come, many would return to Texas to celebrate its anniversary, and to this day, many Juneteenth celebrations are like homecomings or family reunions. Carr also points out a George Floyd connection to this history. A formerly enslaved man named Jack Yates led an 1872 effort to wrangle land in the 3rd Ward of Houston, where George Floyd grew up, for Juneteenth celebrations. That land is now known as Emancipation Park, and a rally to remember Floyd, who was a graduate of Jack Yates High School, took place in the park on May 30th of last year. Very interesting. But as history has made clear, freedom from slavery didn't mean freedom from white supremacy. History and like the last year has made clear. Local and state laws, policing practices, and lynchings restricted the absolute equality promised by General Orders 3. Thus, the holiday has come to represent a promise unfulfilled, and each Juneteenth is a time to reflect both on that need and to bolster the hope that full equality and freedom can yet be achieved. That is interesting. Now, on the movement to make Juneteenth a national holiday, in the 1960s, the civil rights movement brought a new push for America to live up to those ideals, and with it came a renewed awareness of Juneteenth. One turning point in awareness came in the aftermath of the assassination of Martin Luther King in April of 1968. At the time of his death, much of King's work was focused on economic justice. Don't forget that. And he was in the middle of planning a Poor People's Campaign march for the coming months. After he died, the work went on, including via a Solidarity Day rally held in Washington, D.C. that Juneteenth. Organized by King disciple Ralph Abernathy, the rally, which boasted more than 50,000 participants, capped off about 6 weeks during which activists lived in an encampment called Resurrection City to raise awareness of inequality. Wiggins believes that the success of the rally helped inspire participants to host Juneteenth celebrations in their own communities in the years and decades that followed. So I guess that's how it becomes sort of standardized, despite the many different dates originally celebrated for emancipation in different parts of the country. It was during this period that the modern effort to make Juneteenth a national holiday developed. Amid a widespread push to raise awareness of Black history, many felt that the American calendar ought to reflect that past. The fight over a national Martin Luther King Jr. Day holiday, which would be first celebrated in 1986, was underway, and some felt that Juneteenth was also a crucial part of the story. Thanks to the efforts of State Representative Al Edwards, known as Mr. Juneteenth, Texas became the first state to make Juneteenth a state holiday in 1980. It is noted parenthetically that Edwards died this April, and I don't know whether that's last April of 2020 or 2021, but there's a link here, so I'd like to check that out and see if I can find out. Al Edwards, this was April 30th, 2020 was the dateline on the article. So it's a year plus since his passing. In 1994, a group of ministers in New Orleans founded the National Juneteenth Observance Foundation in the wake of a period of uproar over police brutality that echoes today. It's 1994. Yes, it's been going on for, forever, but they've been organizing efforts like this since at least then, let's say. Around that time, it was being reported that the majority of police brutality complaints in the U.S. were directed at New Orleans, per a draft of a 1992 Department of Justice study, as Reverend John Mosley, I've been watching too much Downton Abbey lately, just not Mosley, but Mosley. Reverend John Mosley, one of the co-founders, tells Time, "We were inspired by the horrific incidents such as the videotape beating of Rodney King and the mistreatment of black people by police in New Orleans and others around the country. Today, every state except North Dakota, South Dakota, and Hawaii have some sort of Juneteenth observance." I did not know that. According to the National Juneteenth Observance Foundation. Well, that's where you would get information like that. We're a little bit behind on the launch of the music, so that means we'll cut out for a 1-minute break a little sooner than we thought. Like right now. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Networks Radio. Waiting for our music because we were a couple seconds behind, but let's continue on with the Time Magazine updated history behind the establishment of the new Juneteenth holiday. We left off by noting that today, meaning last year about this time, every state except North Dakota, South Dakota, and Hawaii had some sort of Juneteenth observance. I don't know how official it necessarily was, but for some reason the Dakotas were holdouts, and Hawaii, well, we'll see whether things change anytime in the near future. Over the last 25 years, the group, again, we're talking about the National Juneteenth Observance Foundation, has developed a network of organizers in each state and advocates that Congress make Juneteenth a national observance like Flag Day or an official federal holiday like Thanksgiving. To help promote the holiday, the group created a Juneteenth flag with a broad red stripe to represent the blood black people shed to create the country and a white star over the blue horizon guiding them towards freedom in the future. That is not one that I've seen represented very often. I can see a picture of it here. That too is linked, and I'll be interested to see whether that gains more prominence. Here a photo is included of members of the active duty military raising the Juneteenth flag at the Martin Luther King Park in Fort Smith. So that's of some interest too. Maybe we'll see that with getting some renewed interest. That is actually a new one on me. All right, well, let's continue on here. We wanted to use Juneteenth to call attention to the world that things are not right, and black people are people too, and we want equal treatment for being people too. Mosley says it was not just to have a party and have a good time, it's a rallying cry for us. Cliff Robinson, who in 1997 started the website Juneteenth.com, now a valuable property, I guess, as a clearinghouse for information on Juneteenth celebrations. I recommend stopping by. I guess we've got to take a look at that. What does that look like today? Well, he says that the growth of the internet in the 1990s and social media in the 2000s has made Americans much more aware of the holiday. Its history became further part of the national conversation when Ralph Ellison Ralph Ellison's posthumously published second novel entitled Juneteenth, with a key plot point occurring during a Juneteenth celebration, came out ahead of the holiday in 1999. Certain TV shows like Blackish and Atlanta have run Juneteenth episodes too, but Robinson says nothing so far generated momentum for the holiday the way news of the Trump rally did. How interesting. Opal Lee of Fort Worth, Texas, the 93-year-old Juneteenth advocate who started the Make Juneteenth a National Holiday in 2020 petition on change.org, says that coronavirus stay-at-home orders have also allowed time for the significance of the protests and Juneteenth to finally sink in. I hate to say the pandemic helped, she said, but people have had time, or they've had to stay home, and they're doing thinking and noticing that they didn't have time to do previously. I guess that's very interesting too. I'm just sort of curious now. I want to click through to Juneteenth.com and see if there's, I don't know, like fireworks going off. But maybe tomorrow. No, I don't know. Okay, well, nothing out of the ordinary here, but of course, they too will need time to react. There's a lot of logistics that need refining around the new holiday. So, last section here, what Juneteenth means today. As companies declare Juneteenth a corporate holiday, many Americans are learning about the day's history for the first time, and scholars hope that long overdue conversations about white people's role in this story will finally take place. That, of course, will lead to a lot of people saying, it's not my fault, or my family never owned slaves, or we came over after the Civil War, or not all white people. But don't panic, it's a day off. Everyone will enjoy it. Juneteenth is a way to enter conversation with people who have experiences, memory, culture different than yours, and helps us imagine living together in a plural country. Howard University's Carr points out. I would maybe say pluralistic, but okay. What we've seen over the last 2 centuries is an attempt to forge a national identity without first engaging in a truthful reflection of how the idea of freedom and liberty is taken for granted. This country's national narrative does not apply to everyone, and everyone doesn't observe it. Even within the African American community, the full story behind Juneteenth is not known. At Howard, the historically black university where Carr teaches, he says his students from Texas or activist families will know what Juneteenth marks, but the rest might recognize the name but not know what it means, underscoring society's lack of understanding of black history. Michigan State's Harrison hopes the attention to the holiday will spark discussions about not just that history but also the present. Even as freedom is a legal right, the actualization of that freedom is thwarted at different institutional levels, she says. There's a push to maintain control of every aspect of life. That control is met, however, with persistence and struggle on the part of African Americans. One of the most pressing institutions responsible for controlling and minimizing those freedoms is that of the criminal justice system, and more specifically the branch of policing and law enforcement. At a time when incidents of racial violence are making headlines on a daily basis, Opal Lee sees Juneteenth as an opportunity for a national conversation about why these incidents still take place, and a reminder of the power of voting for elected officials who will pursue reforms. And for her, the crusade to make Juneteenth a national holiday is personal. It brings back memories of Juneteenth 1939, when she was 12 years old and a white mob burned down her family's home because her parents had bought a house in a white neighborhood. We need to get together. We need to be unified, she says. Juneteenth is a unifier. Things haven't advanced as far as they should. We've come a long way, but we've got a long way to go. And indeed we do. And some of that is reflected in some of the recent Republican reaction to the idea of Juneteenth celebrations. And again, I really think that there was a great deal of the Republican ability to get over it in the Congress anyway, came from the fact that it was already a holiday in Texas, and the Texan senators were going to get out of the way of this thing as a result. And there was certainly a sense in which they were able to say, look, if they can even do it in Texas, then I think you could probably manage it here. And I think that helped a great deal. Now, that didn't convince everybody, of course. And there have been Republicans over the last couple of days saying, oh, no, this is actually going to be a great source of division in the country. Now we're going to have, they actually view it as, well, white people will celebrate their freedom and independence on July 4th, and black people will celebrate it on June 19th, and therefore we're divided. And, the idea here is supposed to be that, well, everybody should kind of be excited about the end of slavery, even if you weren't a slave. At this point, 160-something, whatever, years down the road, particularly as most white people scramble to say, I never owned slaves, or my great-great-great-grandparents freed their slaves, right before they were forced to by the, whatever the story might be, whatever excuse you might give for not being guilty somehow of maintaining the slave system or benefiting from the slave system. Whatever your excuse is, if you are anti-slavery or claim to be, then what's the problem with recognizing Juneteenth? Nothing, right? It's really just an excuse to try to whine about people being divided in some way, and that's your secret, that's my real reason for opposing it. Your secret reason being, of course, I don't want them to have anything. That's basically it. Let's see, something I saw this morning, Frank Luntz, who I'm not in the habit of quoting all that often, but is in the habit himself of occasionally saying things that make us say, wasn't that guy a Republican? Yeah, he still is. But he collects 2 tweets on the subject of Juneteenth from Republican conservative activist and infamously white guy Charlie Kirk, the guy from Turning Point USA, and he contrasts his tweets about the subject from 2020, when the idea of creating the federal holiday was gaining currency, but wasn't in any danger of actually passing at that time for whatever reason, versus what he has to say about it now that it actually has become a federal holiday and become a reality. In 2020, he tweeted on the subject, Senate Republicans, as a point of pride, he tweets, Senate Republicans are introducing legislation to make Juneteenth a federal holiday. And then what he's using it for is an opportunity to say, see, it's really Republicans who are pro-Black America and Democrats who are against them. And you all still live on the Democrat plantation. What he ends up saying is Senate Republicans are introducing legislation to make Juneteenth a federal holiday. Barack Obama and Joe Biden were in the White House for 8 years. Why didn't they ever do it? With the little emoji, like, obviously the real racists are the Democrats. Well, now that it has actually been accomplished, largely, I think, due to the fact that there are Democratic majorities in both houses and a Democratic president to sign the legislation, he has a different thing to say here. Lincoln knew America's founding was July 4th, 1776. Of course, there's actual controversy about that because the actual founders, including John Adams, wrote that July 2nd was the actual day that ought to be marked. But like Juneteenth, there were logistical problems. The Declaration of Independence apparently signed and dated July 2nd, but read publicly on July 4th, and now we all think of it as a July 4th thing. And even though there's writings in Adams's papers saying that July 2nd will be the day remembered by history. Anyway, Lincoln knew that America's founding was July 4th, 1776, says Charlie Kirk, this year on the subject of Juneteenth. He knew that day was the day our amazing nation, what a child, made a step from ideal to reality. Juneteenth, which he now encloses in scare quotes, is an affront to the unity of July 4th. We now have 2 summer holidays, and one of them based on race. Shame on the GOP for supporting this. Okay. Well, his tune has changed a little bit, although he was really only trolling the first time. He was only excited about the idea of Republicans introducing Juneteenth legislation because he could use it to shame and troll Democrats. But then once it actually happened and Democrats joined in the effort to make it a holiday, he realized, hey, I'm a dedicated racist. I should have been angry about this a long time ago. So now I am, and he's even mad at Republicans for doing it. So now the inherent tension, as he sees it, we have 2 summer holidays. Oh no, we have to take 2 days off and go to the pool and jump in and have picnics and maybe fireworks. How divisive. I would think most people would be pretty excited about the prospect of having 2 summer holidays and probably celebrate both. I think, though, the other thing I was thinking of was, I didn't put this tweet aside. I don't know why, but maybe I was just too disgusted by it. But there was one that's being shared around the interwebs today. I guess I'm going to search it this way. It was Juneteenth in the subject here, but then let's see. I'll have to remember if I can figure out the right words here. Let's see. Was this it? No. Here we go. Is this it? Is this our original tweet here? Matt Rosendale? Yeah, I guess so. And it's funny. I don't have any serious idea of who Matt Rosendale is, but hey, as it turns out, he's somebody I guess we should actually know because he's a United States representative, a member of Congress. We've just never heard him. He's the member of Congress for Montana, which might help explain how it is that he's escaped notice to this point. But born in Baltimore, Maryland, though, apparently, back in July 7th of 1960, a date we should not mark with a national holiday at any point. But Matt Rosendale is the one responsible for did he do it originally on Twitter? I guess so. Saying, I voted against a bill that would make Juneteenth National Independence Day a federal holiday. That's the official name of it too. And I think that's a little bit, maybe that's the kernel of not quite truth that they're latching onto for their hook in opposing the idea. Independence Day, of course, is the day most people think of when think of July 4th as Independence Day, and including the word independence as opposed to, say, emancipation in the Juneteenth national holiday might be what they think they're objecting to, but they're really just objecting, on racist basis to black people getting anything. But anyway, Rosendale says, I voted against the bill that would make Juneteenth National Independence Day a federal holiday. One of 14 Republicans to do so. He's actually proud of this. Now, this is where it becomes really interesting and weird. This legislation is the culmination of decades of effort by the left, capital L left, to prevent unashamed celebrations of our national story, heritage, and history. Their intent, he says in the second tweet, is to replace the 4th of July with this new day. That's not it. One that will inevitably focus on America's darkest moments. So I actually will give him the benefit of the doubt here and say I don't think that he actually meant what he ended up saying here, which is that emancipation of the last remaining enslaved people in America, although lots of people would dispute that with the Reconstruction or post-Reconstruction Jim Crow sharecropping era, but okay. For in formal terms, the end of slavery in America, I actually don't think he meant to say that the end of slavery in America was one of the darkest moments in American history. I think he thought he was saying that there was that replacing the 4th of July was a bad idea, but it's not really trying to do that anyway. But that replacing the 4th of July with this new day focusing on slavery, that is to say, as opposed to the end of slavery, slavery as an institution, and making a federal holiday in competition in his mind with July 4th that reminds us that, yes, we were a slave nation, is marking one of America's darkest moments. He's trying to say that slavery was one of America's darkest moments, but he ends up saying that the emancipation from slavery was one of America's darkest moments. And, he's just not ready for prime time in that sense, and probably should have kept his mouth shut. But he's stepped in it, and there you go. Anyway, I just thought I would bring that one to your attention in case you haven't seen that one. But that's the level of sophistication and understanding with which many Republicans, white Republicans, are approaching this issue. And so what can I tell you? Duh. It's an awfully stupid thing. Here's one of them now to interrupt our show and tell us why, I don't know, something. Well, we'll find out what that's all about later on. We don't need to concern ourselves with that. Time now, though, for us to move or shift our focus. There's plenty of other items out there that we ought to pay some attention to, including one about which I don't have any full-length reported stories to share, but I got word of this happening the other day, and Greg didn't take the time to mention it, but probably could have as we do our minute and a half on what the hell's going on in Israel each of the last couple of days. Apparently, Benjamin Netanyahu has, to this point, I believe to this very moment, refused to vacate the prime minister's official residence in Israel, though he is no longer prime minister. He's been ousted, and I think everybody kind of knows that, and it's kind of like he's waiting for the federal troops to get to Galveston, Texas, and do something about it. But he out-Trumps Trump in this, although this was something everybody worried that Trump would similarly like to do or try to do. And of course, he did then try to overthrow the government and reinstall himself as president, but he did not refuse to vacate the White House. That really would have been something. That probably would have alerted everybody to just how insane he really was. And maybe he felt it was better that not be widely known. But not only has Netanyahu refused to leave, but this tweet that I happened to see, I think Josh Marshall retweeted it into my timeline, from Gershom Gorenberg, a Washington Post columnist and writer, I guess, on wider Middle East subjects, noting that almost $2,000 worth of soft drinks were delivered to the prime minister's residence just hours before Netanyahu ceased being prime minister and the state stopped paying his grocery bills. So that's pretty interesting. So in preparation for his refusal to leave, I guess he stocked up with $2,000 worth of, I don't know what, Diet Coke or something like that. And of course, lots of people noting the, let's say, the peculiar irony of Netanyahu refusing to leave the house and not being evicted by Israeli armed forces, who are, let's say, practiced and quite adept at forcibly removing people from their properties when they're the right kind of people. And I think we all know what that's about. But this is interesting, and I guess they're going to be hesitant to damage the property. That's true. But, I mean, can we not figure out a way to, minimize damage to the property but still remove the guy? It's quite interesting. There is, in fact, a linked article, but it is in Hebrew, and so that won't do us any good. But perhaps you might want to play around with Google Translate and find out what's being said on that subject. So that I thought was kind of interesting. I wasn't, aware that was going on. I had seen mentions of it, but I'm still a little bit confused about what's happening, as are, I'm sure, the rest of the people in Israel. Not that anybody thinks he's still prime minister, but like, what the hell? Why can't we do something about this? This is the sort of thing that I thought it would be settled relatively quickly, even though I worried a little bit about how it might go down here in the United States, as between loyalist Secret Service agents, if there were any, and, the rest of the, armed forces of the country, or the rest of the security apparatus, if they remain, say, loyal to the Constitution. It was a little strange, but I wasn't anticipating seeing it happen in Israel. So, I don't know. That's just a little odd. And but then again, up until January 6th, I thought that physically invading the United States Capitol and threatening to murder members of Congress carrying out the electoral vote count would probably also get you in lots of trouble. And I'm not really sure that I believe that that's the case anymore. I thought it would get you shot. And one person did get shot, but just one. And Republicans are in the business of rehabilitating that one person as a hero. So, there's that. And lots of people are being prosecuted, and I'm glad to see charges coming down on all these people. But I don't know. I guess the history's judgment is still out on whether or not we really enforce the law against these people or not. I see too many stories about them asking for, and in some cases receiving, permission to stay out of prison, or to stay in home confinement, or to leave home confinement to do things that ought not to be available to them. I saw somebody listing the other day some of the reasons. I don't know whether they were all granted. Some of the reasons various insurgents had given to the courts for justifying their release or temporary release from home confinement or even jail. And they included things like, taking a pre-scheduled vacation to Mexico, or going to a classic car show, which I understand. I think the guy was actually maybe had some business there, but still, your business is going to suffer. You should be in prison. That's kind of the way it is. I'm not certain, what the logic of each of these individual cases is, but I still think we got a long way to go before I'm totally convinced that it's actually illegal for white people to do what they did on January 6th. Anyway, speaking of other situations in which it's no longer possible to determine what the law is, J.J. McNabb, who follows white supremacist and militia activities all the time, slightly off of her ordinary beat, but, within tolerances here, reporting that yesterday that Montana was trending on Twitter, probably not because of their member of Congress saying that Juneteenth was one of the darkest periods of American history, but because, she says, presumably because the Arizona recount, the fake audit that's going on there, has moved their dog and pony show by truck to a Montana cabin in the woods for special scrutiny. Special scrutiny of what? The ballots, I guess. I'm not certain what they've actually moved here. Arizona voting data, the data anyway, taken to a so-called lab in remote Montana. And she offers us a link to a CNN video on the subject, but I'm sure there's probably writing on the subject that we could use would be better suited for radio. Although, I'd like to play the video so you hear all of that, but then they'll come after me for copyright infringement. But there's some pictures of the property. It is in fact, it's not a cabin like log cabin in wood. As she says, it's a lot nicer than Ted Kaczynski's. It's even got a hot tub. It's a very nice, complete and furnished home. The question is, what the hell's going on? And why are they doing it? And how in the world did they get permission to move these operations to Montana, of all places? Let me take a look during the break, which is now coming up, for some print material on this to see if anybody has updated the news on that, because it's pretty confusing. And quite honestly, I can't imagine the judges, if any were consulted, allowing that to go on. But at this point, it's pretty much anything goes in Arizona, I guess, and nobody's watching anything. And there's just no way, I mean, for all the complaints about chain of custody that they made, how any of this is supposed to pass muster, I have no idea. All right, time now for our next break. That'll give us an opportunity to regroup and think about what other subjects we want to cover before we cut out of here for the long Juneteenth weekend. Very, well, what an amazing time we live in anyway. All right, that, plus I'll find out why the doorbell rang. I'll let you know in just a minute. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning. I have good news to report. Many more listeners like you are making critical contributions that keep our show on the air. Makes good sense, of course, and patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple. Now you can make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for helping keep you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all of your support. We literally could not do this without you. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I went looking for a write-up on what's happening with Arizona because I just don't know. I don't get it. I found this write-up at HuffPost by Mary Papenfuss. That's the name. I don't mean to make fun of it, but it's, I don't know, caught me by surprise. So Mary Papenfresh, I'm sorry, Mary, has this to say: Arizona sham auditors transport voting system data, so I guess no ballots or machines have left the state, to secret Montana hideout. And I don't think that's, over the top to call it that, because really, honestly, what in the hell could there possibly be there? And I guess it's probably just one of the fake audit people has a cabin there and thought, well, how nice would it be if I could do my work analyzing, quote unquote, analyzing the data at my vacation property? But I don't know. Let's see what Mary says about this. The liaison for the controversial audit arranged by Republicans conceded the data may contain, quote, sensitive personal information about voters. So that is of some interest as well. They, too, have embedded the CNN video on the subject seems to be the gold standard in terms of what people are using. So I guess CNN probably, scooped everybody and broke the story. But it's a 3.5-minute video, and, I don't know if they're going to want me playing it on the air. They probably don't care. YouTube, though, their stupid YouTube algorithm will flag it as problematic. So I'll read you this from the Huffington Post instead, the HuffPost, pardon me. In the latest development in the partisan Republican, quote, audit of Arizona presidential votes, voting system data has been taken to a secret hideout in Montana. An unsupervised driver transported copies of ballot data, whatever that might mean, in a truck to a cabin in the community of Big Fork in northwest Montana, several media outlets reported. The state Senate Republican liaison has confirmed that copies of voting system data was sent to a, quote, lab in Montana. An observer wrote earlier this month on an SOS website, Secretary of State, SOS website set up by the office of Arizona Secretary of State Katie Hobbs, who is a Democrat. He did not specify what security measures were in place or what the lab in Montana will do with the data or how long it will be in possession of the copies, added the note. All problems that would pretty much render any conclusions that they might come to more or less useless and inadmissible in any legal proceeding, probably. Hobbs, who's running for governor, called the Montana operation madness. She said audit organizers promised a transparent operation with cameras. Well, there was no camera in a cabin in Montana, she said. They could put one there. They just didn't. You can't make this stuff up, Hobbs told CNN, which refers to the operation as a fraudit. So they have adopted that language for it. If it wasn't happening right in front of our eyes, we wouldn't believe it was happening. Probably true. Arizona Republic journalist Jen Fifield discovered that the cabin now holding the records is the residence of Ben Cotton, founder of digital company Cypher, not Cyber, but Cypher, F-I-R. And for whatever reason, it's spelled capital C-Y, C-Y like cyber, then all caps F-I-R, which is a subcontractor of the company running the so-called recount. So a subcontractor, contractor for cyber ninjas, Cypher. Cypher's parent company, Cyber Technologies, also run by Cotton, appears to have the same address in the Montana woods, which was tracked down by CNN this week. Embedded here is Katie Hobbs' tweet about this. I am deeply concerned that the cyber ninjas have moved Maricopa County election data to a residence in Montana, over 1,300 miles from Phoenix, for no discernible reason. And then embedding some CNN video in that tweet. The audit of 2.1 million votes in Maricopa County is hugely controversial. The audit was ordered by state Senate Republicans and only involves races won by Democrats. Aha. The partisan review by the Cyber Ninjas Company, which has no experience with elections, is headed by conspiracy theorist Doug Logan, a promoter of the big lie that the election was rigged. He posted messages months ago that, quote, hundreds of thousands of new votes would inevitably be found for Donald Trump. In one off-the-rails operation, Cyber Ninjas operatives are seeking evidence of bamboo fibers in the ballots, you know about that, as somehow proof that China interfered with the election. One of the auditors actually appears on the same ballot that he's reviewing, as both a failed GOP candidate and as an elector for Trump. Election officials have warned that large numbers of the unsecured ballots may already have been altered or trashed and are now completely unreliable, and that manipulation of voting machines has rendered them unusable for future elections. As for the Montana grab of voter data, at this point in the audit, nothing is really surprising to me. Fifield told Montana NBC affiliate KGVO-TV, the Senate has never told us the full list of contractors involved and the names of the people. It's been like a puzzle trying to put everything together. State Senate liaison Ken Bennett confirmed to KGVO that the quote, powerful lab, powerful, is run by Cotton. Transported data was downloaded from the hard drives that Maricopa County used in the election, he said. It may or may not include voter registration data, and some of it could be sensitive, Bennett said. Fifield said technology experts have warned of the danger of unfettered access in Montana to data that could contain private information of voters. Cotton refused to discuss the data with KGVO because he said he has signed a non-disclosure agreement with himself. The Arizona vote was certified more than 6 months ago by Republican Governor Doug Ducey after several recounts failed to find any irregularities. Joe Biden beat Trump by 10,457 votes in the state. Biden edged out his rival by more than 2 percentage points, about 45,000 votes in Maricopa County, which includes Phoenix. Trump has indicated to guests at his Mar-a-Lago resort in Florida that he thinks votes unearthed for him by the cyber ninjas could be his way back to White House reinstatement. And it's really, by the way, time for us to acknowledge that President Trump is operating at the level of your basic street corner lunatic, and people just want to say so. Except, of course, it gets you in trouble with advocates for mental health services for the homeless, and so you can't say that sort of thing anymore. But I don't know. We need some sort of way to convey just how really like run-of-the-mill mentally ill Donald Trump actually is, and get used to saying it and normalize saying it. And we really ought to be talking about getting the nets and putting the guy in a straitjacket and involuntarily committing him at this point. And there are a lot of people who ought to go with him. One of the other stories we probably could and should be spending time on, but which is now pretty much old news, is how many crazy people there were around Donald Trump in the White House perpetuating this nonsense, and how dangerous it really was. That, for instance, Mark Meadows, as chief of staff, was in fact, conveying these orders from the president to people in the Justice Department saying, you need to pursue my fantasies about voting irregularities and overturn the elections, and writing briefs and forwarding them to the Justice Department saying, sign this and file it. I want to appeal to the Supreme Court to overturn the election. And people saying, yes, I will pass those orders on, and only finding in the Justice Department that they're basically, agreeing not to do it, but writing snarky emails back and forth to one another like, can you believe how crazy this is? As opposed to saying, we have a national security problem here, and we really ought to do something about this and capture this guy and cart him away. So for all the fears about the deep state and the true, being the true power behind the throne, et cetera, we now know what the deep state actually does. They make snarky emails to one another. They agree not to do things, not to carry these things out, which is great, but all they do is sit there and say, well, we got to wait this out and pretend that this president is normal for as long as it takes to get him out of office. It's really pretty amazing. In fact, I did put aside a piece. It won't create news here by reading it, but just give you a feeling of exactly what was going on, how crazy it was. Michael Gerson, writing in the Washington Post, an opinion piece, Trump DOJ revelations should newly shame his Republican enablers. But of course, as you know, they're not capable of that. And by way of illustration of that, here is a picture of Mark Meadows with Trump at the White House. And in case you thought, different, what's amazing is I'm looking at them dressed identically. Like Mark Meadows, a former member of Congress, now at this point that the picture is taken, chief of staff of the White House, is so captured by Donald Trump's lunacy that he's dressing like him, like some sort of superhero worship. The red tie, worn too long, et cetera, et cetera. It's really quite bizarre to look at. Well, anyway, this piece, a note at the top of the piece that the column's been updated. We'll see if we can figure out what he updated. But again, Michael Gerson writing, when I worked at the White House, I always entered the Oval Office with a feeling akin to reverence. Being invited there early in the morning to go over a speech or participating in policy discussion was sobering. There's a kind of historical gravity and democratic majesty that demands your best and highest effort. So President Donald Trump's Oval Office meeting on December 18th, 2020, has always been particularly revolting to me. Do you remember which one this is? The day before, former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn had appeared on the conservative cable network Newsmax to argue that Trump could deploy the military to rerun the 2020 presidential election. The next day, Trump had Flynn into the Oval Office to discuss the idea. According to an account in the Post, then White House counsel Pat Cipollone pushed back, quote, strenuously against a military takeover of the electoral process. Do you think? Maybe he ought to do that. I mean, great for him. Maybe great enough for me to try to figure out how he pronounces that name. But anyway, Gerson continues, I know that elected Republicans who stick up for Trump have sacrificed their honor and conscience too many times to feel any stirring of shame, but maybe just a specter of sanity still haunts their lonely hours. They are actively defending a man who sustained the history of the who stained the history of the presidency with a meeting at which martial law was on the agenda. They are enablers of a political figure who hates our system of government whenever it conflicts with his interests. The revelations keep coming out about Trump's subversion of his office and the Justice Department in a desperate and lawless attempt to retain power. We know that Trump contemplated having the federal government seize voting machines in key states. We know he pressured local elections officials to, quote, find more votes and urged state legislators to overturn legitimate election results. We know he gathered protesters and incited and sent them to the U.S. Capitol to threaten members of Congress if they didn't overturn the election. Now, from detailed reporting in the Post, we know that Trump, both directly and through proxies, pressured employees of the Justice Department to investigate a raft, love the rafts, of bogus election fraud claims. He had a draft Supreme Court filing sent to the acting Solicitor General that would have disputed the election results in 6 states. He considered elevating a senior staffer at the Justice Department who was open to this absurd claim to the role of acting Attorney General, and was dissuaded only by the prospect of mass resignations at Justice. It is astounding to see emails marked from the EOP, the Executive Office of the President, with the subject line, "From POTUS," spreading absurd propaganda, urging unethical actions, and abusing power in open defiance of all constitutional norms. It is astounding to see the Chief of Staff to the President, Mark Meadows, pressing a series of insane conspiracy theories with the Justice Department, including one alleging that the election had been stolen by military satellites controlled in Italy. I remember hearing about that for the first time when they reported it, like that they were calling it Italy Gate. And I was like, I don't even know what is this? It was that crazy. It never even escaped the crazy sphere, and have us all find out about it. The 2 chiefs of staff I, Gerson, worked for in the White House would have laughed at such garbage and resigned if ordered to spread it. I'm tired of the laughing, though. I'm thinking more along the lines of, where are the chiefs of staff who would arrest the people that propose this stuff? Exile them physically from the United States. Well, anyway, they would have laughed and they would have resigned if ordered to spread it. This is because they were principled public servants, but not willing to arrest anybody. Meadows is a man without character who betrayed the institution of the presidency by obeying hilariously, and I don't know why hilariously, dishonorable orders. Flat out illegal. People need to land in the clink. It is astounding that the then head of the Civil Division at the Department of Justice, Jeffrey Bossert Clark, that's who Greg had mentioned the other day, whose name we were fumbling for a couple of days ago, should be sympathetic to Trump's entirely baseless claim of fraud in the Georgia outcome and internally advocate a theory justifying the appointment of alternative electors. How must it feel in a vast building full of respectable and reputable lawyers to be the only senior figure without adult judgment or an ethical compass? I don't think he knows or cares, but interesting. And despite all this, the vast majority of elected Republicans have chose to stand with a president who would have conducted a coup if it had been within his power. Despite all this, 175 House Republicans, along with 35 GOP senators, voted against a commission to investigate the January 6th assault on the Capitol. Conservative media is in full big lie swing, blaming liberal activists, or the FBI now, for inciting Trump's violent crowd, or denying that the day was violent at all. 21 House Republicans refused to support awarding the Congressional Gold Medal to the police officers who defended the Capitol on January 6th, effectively siding with the forces of sedition. It is clear what these Republicans are saying to Americans. Serving the country has ceased to interest them, and their deepest loyalty now belongs to power alone. It is also clear what they're saying to Trump. He has their full permission to assault, once again, the political system he tried and failed to destroy. Like I said, not much in the way of breaking news there, but somehow necessary for the mood, I think. Let's see, other things that I wanted to share with you. Late breaking in entering my radar here, but Thomas Zimmer, historian at Georgetown, at the moment visiting professor at Georgetown, and who we've quoted in the past, is commenting here and referring to yet another Greg Sargent article. Greg, too, very good at setting the mood for these things. He's noting here, in reference to his own tweet here, In case you missed it, a reflection on why we need to look beyond contemptible acts of individual GOP elected officials and instead acknowledge the underlying ideology that animates the Republican Party as a whole. That only Republican rule is legitimate and must therefore be secured by whatever means. And I guess whatever means necessary is what he's talking about. He's referring to his own tweet from yesterday, noting this piece, Greg Sargent's, is spot on. Instead of pretending that individual politicians are the problem, we need to acknowledge what the plumb line, Greg Sargent, has called the larger truth, that the Republican Party itself has become an anti-democratic force and an acute threat to American democracy. I, of course, agree, because it's what I argued in May of 2009 to Barack Obama. I was summarily dismissed, but it was well worth the time and the effort, and I would just like to note the fact that, I'm glad everyone else has arrived at the same conclusion these many years later, though many of you arrived at that conclusion along with me, or maybe even before me. Referring here to Sargent's own piece, and I don't think we read this one, but this one was about the snub of Officer Michael Fanone, who was visiting members on Capitol Hill, lobbying in favor of the January 6th Commission and running into Representative Andrew Clyde, who refused to shake his hand. But actually, I think maybe we'll read, rather than Sargent's article on the subject, perhaps Tom Zimmer's tweet thread on the notion would help set the mood a little bit better. As Greg Sargent rightfully notes, not every Republican has gone as far as Andrew Clyde in Georgia in their open disdain for democracy, the rule of law, and for those who protected it on January 6th. But let's remember that calling the insurrection a normal tourist visit, as Clyde famously did, or acting the way he did towards a man who risked his own life to defend American democracy, does not get you in trouble with the Republican Party. As a matter of fact, the GOP is happy to accommodate people like Clyde or the 147 Republicans who voted to overturn the election even after the insurrection, or extremists like Marjorie Trader Greene, my moniker for her, or, of course, the insurrectionist-in-chief, Donald Trump. Why is that? Because most Republican elected officials and at least about half of Republican voters share the same underlying ideology that animates people like Clyde and actively support the political project of installing conservative minority rule. The underlying ideology states that only Republicans represent the will of real, red, white, Christian, patriarchal America, while Democrats are pursuing an un-American political project fueled by a coalition of people who don't deserve their place in the body politic. In this worldview, Democrats are not just political opponents, but a radical, socialist, un-American political force trying to turn what is supposed to be a white Christian nation into a land of multiracial pluralism. Therefore, according to this widely shared Republican ideology, democratic governance is fundamentally illegitimate, and it must be prevented and obstructed by whatever means necessary. That is the tale Republican officials and conservative intellectuals have been telling, and it's the core message of the right-wing media machine. That's why the base is primed to believe Trump's big lie and ready to abolish democracy in order to prevent democratic rule. Here is a much longer version of this argument. He refers to one of his own tweet threads with plenty of receipts. You can follow it if you like. This is the larger truth that Greg Sargent mentions, the specifics of this or that radical claim. Voter fraud, fake Chinese ballots, the insurrection never happened or did, but Antifa is to blame. Almost all don't matter as long as they adhere to this larger truth. The inherent contradictions between the many far-right conspiracies are irrelevant. As long as it denounces Democrats as the enemy of the true will of the people, it's not a lie. As long as it's based on the idea that only Republican rule is legitimate, it's the, quote, truth. What makes the current moment so acutely dangerous is that reactionaries who define real America as a nation dominated by white Christians feel their backs against the wall and are convinced that all measures are justified to defeat an illegitimate opponent. Upholding democracy is not important. If democracy interferes with white Christian dominance, it has to go. The insurrectionists? Many Republicans are certainly somewhat uncomfortable with what happened on January 6th, but in the grand scheme of things, the people who stormed the Capitol had a point, as many conservatives like to argue, and were generally on the right side. Putin thinks so, by the way, as well, just in case you were wondering. Insurrection or not, in this worldview, someone definitely has to stand up against this godless, un-American liberal menace, because conservatives feel like their side has been losing for too long, and defeat is not an option in a fight of good versus evil. If you are operating from this basic place, as Greg Sargent puts it, then it makes sense to denounce Officer Fanon. The fact that he's a cop remains relevant only as long as he's acting to uphold the right kind of law and order, traditional conservative rule. If you believe, however, as many Republicans do, that on January 6th Congress voted to install an illegitimate president after a fraudulent election, then what Officer Fanon was doing that day was enabling a dangerous un-American faction to rule. Worse yet, Fanon has been actively speaking out against the insurrectionists and their enablers in Congress, against Donald Trump and the Republicans who still support him. He's become the enemy, or at the very least, a problem for the conservative political project. As individuals, the Andrew Clydes of this world won't bring democracy down, but the party that elevates them might. The fate of American democracy depends on whether or not we acknowledge this larger truth, that the GOP is a threat to democracy and the rule of law. And that's the end of his rant. Only leads me back to my own, which is that, yes, this is the Republican theory of governance, that no law binds them because they're on some sort of holy mission for right, and any opposition, no matter what the basis of it, is illegitimate on its face. That this is the Republican theory of governance, that it isn't George W. Bush who's doing it, or Dick Cheney who's doing it, or Donald Trump who's doing it, and that a failure to confront it and defuse it and punish it, and maybe it still happens even if you do all these things, but you certainly won't get anywhere by ignoring it and looking forward, not backward, etc., that by doing that, you guarantee yourself that the next Republican president will do the same and worse. I didn't have any idea at the time, immediately following the George W. Bush administration, that Donald Trump would be the next person. If you had told me it was Donald Trump, I probably would have said, oh my God, now you definitely know that this will be the same and worse, because he's got no grounding in how to actually run a government at all. All he is just one big, selfish baby. Empower him with the trappings of the presidency, and it will be a total disaster. Somebody else might be slower moving, but they will move forward if you don't draw this line, if you don't say you will be imprisoned if you do this sort of thing. And even if you do say it, they may still do it. But yeah, if you had told me it was going to be Donald Trump, I would have said, and not 10 times worse, 20 times worse. But it's not because it was Donald Trump. You pick it. Give me any respectable Republican. The next Republican will try to ignore all the rules and all the norms and do things their way. By the way, it occurred to me the other day that I thought, out of nowhere, it just struck me that I thought the next big Republican aggression on the Supreme Court might be, and I mean, it's ludicrous and baseless, and there's all sorts of writings and norms against it, but they'll point to the Constitution and say it doesn't say this anywhere. They'll become frustrated with Roberts as Chief Justice, and they'll say somewhere, well, it doesn't say anywhere that the job of Chief Justice is a lifetime appointment. Justice, of course, any federal judge would be a lifetime appointment. I'm not considering moving him off the court or impeaching him, but I am saying that this is not me, but the next Republican president who might say, I'm appointing a new Chief Justice. John Roberts can remain as an Associate Justice. The lifetime appointment is to the bench, but to the seat, I don't think so. Now, everybody else does, and everyone will scream and cry on and carry on that that's not how it works, and there's this and there's that and there's this precedent and the other one. But I just, I had this feeling that would be something they might pursue. There are other avenues that they might use that are easier and more widely accepted that might lead to the same result. But I don't know. For some reason, I just thought that's the sort of frontal assault that we can expect, even if the next Republican president comes from the ranks of so-called respectable Republicans. All right, well, it's time to let you go for the big Juneteenth weekend. I'm glad we had so much good material to work with in discussing it because, we all have a little less time than I thought to get used to the exciting new prospect. Thank you so much to Darwin for sharing his excitement about it and getting us kicked off on this thing. Lots to read up on over the weekend, some interesting things. There was a new entry in the weird story of Bill Gates becoming the largest owner of farmland in the United States. So I threw that one into pocket. Maybe we can revisit that subject sometime soon. Plus a story I'll share with you that I should have shared yesterday, link-wise, about the lab leak theory becoming, shakier than normal, but they put it back in the news yesterday and didn't have the link. This time a link for you to read over the weekend to an article in Foreign Policy magazine. The lab leak theory doesn't hold up. Would you like to know exactly why that is? I'll share that link with you. You can read it over the weekend. Do enjoy yourself over the weekend. And why wait, I say, for the weekend? Just stay tuned for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Justice Putnam and enjoy yourself now.
From networksradio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the morning with David Waldman.
Good. He'll be updating us on the GOP squashing the Manchin compromise into 1,000 pieces of Stacey Abrams' dog whistles, as he puts it. And then on the rest of the menu for today, a GOP lawmaker used campaign funds to fight ethics allegations that he misused campaign funds. You would think that would be a no-no. Stay tuned.